بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. السادة الحضور، نرحب بكم في ندوة جديدة من الندوات التي تعقدها أكاديمية نسيج عبر الإنترنت. وباختصار، ندوة الليلة تتسم بخصوصية وتميز كبير، حيث أنها تأتي تحت مظلة التعاون الاستراتيجي مع الاتحاد العربي للمكتبات والمعلومات، والذي يشرفنا بالحضور سعادة الدكتور نبهان الحراسي رئيس الاتحاد في بداية عهدته مع المكتب التنفيذي بعد كثير من الإنجازات قام بها الدكتور البروفيسور حسن السريحي والمكتب التنفيذي السابق، ومتمنين لسعادة الدكتور نبهان كل التوفيق وفريقه. والدكتور نبهان غني عن التعريف في رئاسته لقسم المكتبات والمعلومات بجامعة سلطان قابوس، ثم توليه عمادة كلية الآداب والعلوم الاجتماعية بالجامعة، والآن يتحمل مسؤولية اتحاد عربي يناط بمسؤولية تخصص كامل هو المكتبات والمعلومات. تجعلنا في شغف لأن نقدمه للسادة الحضور في ندوتنا الليلة، والتي سوف تدور حول الأرشيفات الرقمية، الفرص الراهنة والاتجاهات المستقبلية، والتي حضرنا فيها البروفيسور كريستوفر بروم، وسوف أعطي نبذة عنه لاحقا بعد أن يتفضل الأستاذ دكتور نبهان بإلقاء كلمته الافتتاحية في هذه الليلة. تفضل دكتور نبهان.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الفاضل الأستاذ الدكتور عبد الله متولي، المشرف على أكاديمية نسيج، بروفيسور كريستوفر بروم، السادة والسيدات الحضور، أسعد الله أوقاتكم جميعا بكل خير. يشرفنا ويسعدنا التعاون مع أكاديمية نسيج في تقديم هذه المحاضرة وغيرها من الأعمال القادمة بإذن الله، وأنتهز الفرصة لأشكرهم على هذا المشروع العلمي والثقافي الذي ساهم بشكل كبير في تلبية احتياجات معرفية للمتخصصين في علم المكتبات والمعلومات والأرشيف. والتعاون مع هذه المؤسسة متجذر منذ عقود سبقت، من خلال التعاون مع المؤسسة الأم شركة نسيج، التي لها الفضل الأكبر في رعاية الملتقيات العلمية للمتخصصين، فلهم جزيل الشكر والتقدير. السادة والسيدات، يواصل الاتحاد العربي للمكتبات والمعلومات خدمة المتخصصين في كافة أرجاء الوطن العربي، فبعد النجاح الكبير للمؤتمر العلمي 33 الذي نظمه الاتحاد في مدينة أبو ظبي بالشراكة مع الأرشيف والمكتبة الوطنية، شارك في ملتقى المكتبات الوطنية بإمارة الشارقة وقمة المناخ التي عقدت بجمهورية مصر العربية، ونشر عبر منصته الإلكترونية 4 كتب علمية بالنص الكامل كان قد أعلن عنها في المؤتمر، وبحمد الله انتشرت ولاقت صدى إيجابي واسع من قبل المتخصصين والمهنيين، وندعو الجميع للاستفادة من هذه الكتب في الجوانب العلمية والبحثية. كما سنعلن بإذن الله عن الكتاب الخامس بعنوان المعيار العربي الموحد للمكتبات الوطنية، وسوف يتاح أيضا عبر منصة الاتحاد تعزيزا لمبادئ الوصول الحر للمعلومات. الأخوة والأخوات أعضاء الاتحاد العربي للمكتبات والمعلومات، كان وما زال الاتحاد مظلة المتخصصين والمهنيين في الوطن العربي، والحاضن للجمعيات الوطنية في مختلف الدول العربية، ونعدكم بجملة من الفعاليات والأنشطة النوعية، حيث نعد حاليا خطة تنفيذية متكاملة للعام 2023. كما أتوجه بالشكر لكل من تواصل معي منذ تولي مهمة رئاسة المكتب التنفيذي وأبدى استعداده للتعاون، أو قدم مقترحات لأنشطة ومبادرات مستقبلية. كما نؤكد جاهزيتنا الدائمة للتعاون مع الجمعيات المهنية والأقسام الأكاديمية في مختلف المجالات. وبإذن الله سيتم الإعلان عن مذكرة المؤتمر 24 قريبا، والذي سيقام في المملكة العربية السعودية برعاية كريمة من هيئة المكتبات السعودية. أخيرا أتوجه بالشكر الجزيل لزميلي الأستاذ الدكتور عبد الله متولي على الدعوة الكريمة لإلقاء هذه الكلمة، والشكر موصول لكافة الزملاء في مؤسسة أكاديمية نسيج. كما أشكر البروفيسور كريستوفر على تلبية الدعوة لإلقاء المحاضرة. نسأل الله التوفيق، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. أشكر لك دكتور نورهان هذه التقدمة المسهبة بوعي، لأنها غطت جميع الجوانب الخاصة بأنشطة الاتحاد، ونحن نشرف بإطلالة الاتحاد ورئيس الاتحاد والمكتب التنفيذي وكل من يشارك في هذه المؤسسة المتميزة والتي تقوم بكثير من الأنشطة لخدمة التخصص على المستوى العربي. كذلك أشكر لك هذه الأريحية في التعاون، الدعوة إلى التعاون مع أكاديمية نسيج ومؤسستها الأم التي ترعاها، لأنها أتصور أن هذه الندوة ما هي إلا بداية غيض من فيض لكثير من الأنشطة التعاونية التي نتطلع إليها سويا. واسمحوا لي أن أعرف بإيجاز على موضوع ندوتنا الليلة، والتي كما عهدنا أنه بعد أن نقدم لها سيقوم المتحدث بإعطاء الندوة باللغة الإنجليزية، والتي صاحبها ترجمة على القناة العربية في نفس الوقت، ثم الأسئلة سوف يتم تلقيها في النهاية بالكتابة في صندوق الأسئلة والاستفسارات، وسأقوم ترجمها إلى الإنجليزية وستترجم بالعربية على القناة الأخرى ليجيب عنها ضيفنا اليوم. نتحدث عن الأرشيف الرقمي، ونحن في عالمنا العربي دون استثناء نركز على ما يسمى بالتحول الرقمي، لأنه يسمى تحولا رقميا إلا أنه هو قدر رقمي، لأن التحول الرقمي هذا الذي نتحدث عنه ينبغي أن يكون في ذهن الجميع، وبالتالي ليس غريبا أن تكون هناك استراتيجيات ومبادرات تدعم هذا التوجه. ضيفنا اليوم الذي سوف يتحدث حول هذا الموضوع سوف يتناوله بجوانب عدة يتم فيها طرح الفرص المستقبلية بعد أن يتم تقييم الوضع الراهن حتى ننطلق منه. سوف يتحدث عن الخدمات المشتركة التي تقوم بها المؤسسات من خلال مستودعاتها الرقمية. أيضا سوف يتحدث عن قضية التقنيات وكيف سوف تنعكس على الأرشفة ومع ربطها بالتواصل الاجتماعي والأرشفة البريد الإلكتروني وكثير من القنوات في ظل التقنيات الناشئة. كذلك سوف يعرج على الأدوات والممارسات التي تستخدم ويدعم ذلك بنماذج تطبيقية كثيرة، حتى نقرب ونطمئن إلى أن ما سوف يعرض الآن هو خلاصة خبرات. نعرف بضيفنا البروفيسور كريستوفر بروم، لأنه قائم بمهام نائب رئيس جامعة إلينوي، وهذه الجامعة في تخصص المكتبات الأولى على مستوى الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، وهو نائب الرئيس هذه الجامعة للبحث والابتكار والفنون والعلوم الإنسانية والمجالات ذات الصلة بها. كذلك هو العميد المساعد للاستراتيجيات الرقمية والشؤون الأكاديمية بمكتبة جامعة إلينوي، وهو زميل جمعية الأرشيفيين الأمريكيين، وقد شغل سابقا منصب محرر المطبوعات التي تصدر عن الجمعية، وهو يشرف حاليا على 2 من أكبر مشاريع المنح الجرانتس. بالمناسبة إن شاء الله في الأسبوع القادم سيكون لدينا ندوة أخرى عن كيفية إعداد المنح والالتحاق بها وتسجيلها، ويكون لدينا خبير آخر إن شاء الله ضمن فعاليات أكاديمية نسيج. والمشروع الذي يتولاه دكتور كريستوفر حول أرشفات البريد الإلكتروني بناء القدرات والمجتمع، والمشروع الآخر هو أرشفة البريد الإلكتروني بنسق PDF المواصفات الأولية وحتى نصل إلى الكوميونتي براكتس أو مجتمع الممارسة. أخيرا وليس آخرا، دكتور أو بروفيسور كريستوفر هو عضو المجلس الاستشاري لمشروع أرشيف رصد جائحة كورونا، وهو أرشيفي تمتد خبرته لأكثر من 20 عاما. Professor Christopher, it was just an introduction from our guest. He's actually not guest, from Dr. Nabhan Al-Harasi. He gave a word from his position as the head, as the president of the AFLI. And I give the introduction for you and for your experience and actually your position and the topic that you will talk about it tonight. So the virtual stage is yours. Please start your webinar, and all of us are listening to you. Professor Christopher, please. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Metawali. I'd like to thank all of you for being here this morning, where I'm located. And I'd like to particularly acknowledge and thank Professor Nabhan Al-Harasi and the Arab Federation of Libraries for sponsoring the webinar tonight. It really gives me great pleasure to be here. It excites me. It makes me really interested to make connections with people in new parts of the world that I have not previously spoken with or visited. And I'm particularly grateful for the connection with Nasej Academy, because it's such a fruitful collaboration and such a wonderful organization, as I've gotten to know Dr. Metawali and all of you from the previous webinar that I was part of. I did want to mention before starting tonight, you can see that our topic is digital archives, current opportunities and future trends. And the webinar that I'm giving and presenting you tonight is really intended to build upon and to offer additional material for a webinar that I had previously provided for Nasej Academy in the spring of this year, which was a new topic for me, but the topic was digital archives, 10 mistakes and how to avoid them. And I gave that webinar from my own personal experience, things that I've done wrong over the years, and then better practices that I've learned as I've been a digital archivist and as I've been a librarian. So again, it gives me great pleasure to be here to build on that prior talk and to hear from all of you and make connections with all of you. I want to just start by saying that I don't consider myself an expert in many ways. There's just so much to learn about digital archives and so many techniques and practices that you can use. So I do intend and hope that I learn a lot from you as part of the talk here tonight through your questions and through comments that you might submit through the chat box. It's my understanding that we'll be addressing questions at the end, and I do intend to leave lots of time for questions and answers and discussions, at least a half hour or so. But it is my hope that by the end of the evening here, you're able to engage with 4 areas related to digital archives and opportunities and trends. First, I'd like you to be in a position where you can think about and name 3 current opportunities related to digital archives in whatever country, whatever location, whatever institution you operate in and where you work, and specifically to the broader value that digital archives provide to society. Secondly, I hope that you're able to describe some ways in which new computing technologies, such as artificial intelligence, such as machine learning, such as social media archiving, and other areas pose for digital cultural heritage collections, because these are all very good technologies. They're all useful in society, but I'd like us to think critically about how we can use them as archivists and librarians. Because, and this brings me to the third point and third takeaway that I hope you have from tonight, I'd like you all to be in a position to investigate some specific technical solutions that you can use for preserving materials, such as, for example, social media records or documents that exist in cloud-based services like Google Drive or Box.com or other places, or email collections. These are all areas where I conduct my own research in, so I'll be conducting and speaking from my own experience. And then finally, my hope for tonight is that all of us can find ways that we can collaborate more with people in community organizations who are not necessarily archives or libraries, but who have an interest in preserving their cultural heritage materials. So that's an overview of tonight's webinar. And again, I'm just really looking forward to diving in here. So in order to do that, I'd like to move along to the next slide. And once the curtains move aside here, you can see that I actually want to start with a question for all of you. And the question is essentially this: when I say the phrase digital archives, what comes to your mind? What types of materials are important to you for preservation? What types of digital materials that don't exist in paper-based form should we as archivists and librarians be thinking about preserving? So I'd like you to take just a moment to reflect on that and chat and put a few ideas into the chat box in Zoom, and I'll review those there. So again, what comes to mind when I say the term digital archives? Emails, yes, thank you. That's an area where we'll discuss things tonight. E-books, so electronic books, materials that don't exist in paper-based format, preservation pathways for those. Other materials that come to mind, documents, so it could be a report or a memo from one person to another. Databases, that's a good idea. Social media. I see something in Arabic here, which unfortunately I'm unable to translate, but maybe someone can help me there. Repository services, websites. Electronic documents. So yes, thank you. These are all good objects of preservation and things that I, as a leader in the library here and as an archivist in the past, have thought about and preserved. Manuscripts, Twitter accounts, digital signatures, all preservation objects. So tonight we'll be talking about these three topics, which are digital archives, and I'll describe what I mean by digital archives. It's a very easy phrase to say, and I think, as we see in the chat box here, it means a little bit something different to everybody. So I'd like to offer my own perspective and definition of digital archives, and then also think about how preserving digital archives relates to our own social context. Regardless of where we live, we're all seeking to navigate our professional lives and our personal lives in a world that's under immense pressure. We know, for interested in documenting society, that we think about ways of preserving culture in areas that might be affected by war, or might be affected by social tensions internally and other topical areas. But for those of us who are interested in thinking about documenting society, our context calls us both to think very deeply about the world as it existed in the past, the world as it exists now, and the world that's being made and is going to be available to us in the future. My core message for tonight is that we as archivists and librarians are not just passive participants watching society go by. Those of us in the cultural heritage sector can also make a better future by understanding our current cultural tensions and points of influence, the limits that are imposed upon us, and how we can work to imagine a better future. I was thinking as I was preparing the talk tonight of a point that one of my professors made when I was a graduate student in history. And this was a professor of 20th century world history, and he made the point to us that the tragedies of World War I and World War II fundamentally, in his mind, resulted from a lack of imagination or a failure of imagination. That made me think that as archivists and librarians, we are called to imagine the good future that we all see, a thriving society, and a society where people are able to bring forward all of their contributions and then supply materials and preserve cultural materials that help people be part of that better future. So we should engage from society in terms of our own personal context, use tools and techniques, and then build partnerships that increase cultural understanding, both internal to our own cultures and then across cultures, as we're doing here today. So to be a community member and a steward of cultural memories in 2023 means that we need to attend to our local context, our personal context, our local context, and the global context. So here in the United States, we have a saying that all politics is local, and the US is a democracy. That means that we think that no politician ever gets elected to office unless they pay attention to the needs of our local communities. And my message here and the way that we try to approach our own work is to attend to our local communities and preserve records within those. So I'd like to start in that respect by telling you just a little bit about myself as background, so you know where I'm coming from with this topic and my own perspective. I was trained as a historian. I was not trained to be a digital archivist or a librarian. And My background was in British cultural history, British labor, and social history. I did work as an archivist for about about 18 years here at the University of Illinois. And since 2018, I've been called upon to be the Associate Dean for Digital Strategies in our library. I am currently directing 2 grant projects related to digital archives and email archives in specific. The first is a project I'll talk a little bit later called Email Archives Building Capacity and Community. And the second project is seeking to build a PDF, portable document format, PDF-based standard for email archives. So as an archivist with about 20 years of working with experience with digital records and systems, I've now moved into other areas, but that still is closest to my heart. All of my work has taken place here at the University of Illinois, and I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about my own context. If you see the slide here, this is a picture of the University of Illinois shortly after its founding in 1867. And you can see it's a very rural area at that time. You know, we have some cows grazing in the front, and we have a little creek going through the front here. And then we have 2 initial buildings and some farmhouses. So since 1867, the university has been built to be a quite impressive, large and public comprehensive university. We're what's known in the United States as a land grant university. As I said, we were founded in 1867 in a period of crisis in the United States, immediately following the U.S. Civil War. The state of Illinois was given a grant of land from the federal government with a specific goal of helping to educate people in the practical, mechanical, and agricultural arts. Our campus has grown quite a bit since then. As you can see, we're an international university. At this point in time, we enroll students from around the world, including currently 69 students from Saudi Arabia, 43 from Egypt, 86 from Iran, some from the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Oman, and generally speaking, the Arabic-speaking world. We're a hub for scientific research, so a big part of our goal here in the library is to tap into research trends in information sciences and apply those with grant funding from federal agencies and with our own work. So before I go any further, I'd like to just ask if I can do a poll and ask you if you can tell me a little bit about your own context. So Mr. Saeed, would you be able to start the poll question for us? So yes, I'd essentially like to ask just a little bit about your own background, and that is whether you work in an academic or an educational institution, a corporation or business, or a nonprofit organization. Great, I'm seeing the responses come in here, and it looks like we have a large number of people coming from other academic institutions like the University of Illinois, some nonprofits, some corporations and businesses. Great, thank you very much. And again, if you'd like to take a moment to introduce and tell me a little bit about yourself in chat, we can review that a little bit later in time as well. So again, for additional context, you can see the University of Illinois is located here in the Midwest region of the United States. And I mention this because I bring what might be called a Midwestern sensibility to digital archives, which is a topic that essentially means we try to take a very practical approach, less theory-driven and more practice-driven. So I'd like to turn then to my first topic, which is attend to the personal, local, and global context. So as I said, to be a steward of community memories in 2023 means that we need to engage both fully with society and the positive and negative aspects of our local community. I live in the state of Illinois, which means that in my case, our state, which you can see on the right-hand side of the slide here, and which is located in the central part of the United States is facing some fiscal problems, some fiscal issues, and we have a rural part of the state that's largely dominated by agriculture, but our university is a leader in science, engineering, and business. If you look at the map here, I've actually included a political map of the United States showing results from one of our last election processes, and you can see the divide that many of you have heard about between the rural and urban parts of the U.S., where different districts are colored by one of the two political parties that tends to dominate local politics here in the U.S. So I'm really here in this blue section in the middle part of Illinois as part of the university. So some issues that we're facing here in Illinois in the United States, and areas where we're trying to ensure that we find records that document these issues and problems, include things like the effects of inflation and on people, on economic growth, some of the partisan divisions that we face. We have a lot of debates over the nature of education, the role of the university in society, on less so on my campus, but in the state as large. Lots of times people question the value of a university education, and we have lots of debates around what type of speech should be allowed at universities under U.S. First Amendment. We also have controversies over things like election results or the proper roles for men and women in society. We have lots of debates about immigration and the role that communication technologies are playing. So these are all issues where we're actively seeking records that document what's happening in society. So just like to encourage all of you to give a moment to think about what issues are important to you in documenting your societies and your organizations. And if you'd like to share those in chat with me, I could review those with you quickly as well, because I'm very interested to know what issues you see as prominent to your own work in the organizations where you work. As I mentioned, these are some issues that are prominent for me, but what issues are prominent in your own institutions are you trying to document and gather records related to them? Oh, thank you. Yes, I see a question about blockchain technologies. So yes, I'll come back to that perhaps at the end of the talk, but yes, blockchain and applications of the blockchain are an area of emergence in our organization here. Are there other topics that are important to all of you? Again, I see some comments here in Arabic, but if someone could translate those for me, that I can come to those, back to those later. Pause just for an additional second here for other thoughts. Okay, well, thank you. I would like to move on. Oh, Internet of Things. Yes, thank you. That's a good topic to talk about as well, which I'll come back to at the end. What I'd like to mention is, if you think back to the list of topical areas that I mentioned, those are all topics which politically or socially one may have an opinion about them on one side or the other of the topic. But I approach documenting them in a very specific way, because in the United States, I work within what is known as the public archives tradition here in the United States. I provided on this slide a picture of the U.S. National Archives building in Washington, D.C. And in this public archives tradition, it acknowledges that the government is often the creator and maintainer of records, and that records provide guarantees to citizens, rights to property, and so forth, but that the government archives itself and the archivist, him or herself, should not take a particular position on what type of records are collected, but simply collect the records that document society, regardless of their own opinion or their own valuing of the social value of those records. In the public archives tradition, we think a lot about looking for records that provide evidence about some activity that's taking place in society and differentiating that from the informational value of the archives. I spent a lot of my career thinking about the types of records that provide evidence of what's happening in society, and we actively seek to collect those records. Here at the University of Illinois, we have a key element of our mission in our charter or our mandate. Like the U.S. National Archives, my own institution has a mandate for its work in the general rules of the university. And our mandate is to document the institution and the institutional activities. So I always recommend for people that are involved in digital archives work to consider developing a mandate for your work and putting that mandate through the governance process of your institution, if possible. Because once you have a mandate and a stated purpose for your collecting work in the governing documents of your institution, it provides you a basis for collecting certain types of records or saying, no, we do not collect those type of records. To me, a documentation policy or a mandate like this gives us a little bit of leverage with what we do and provides us an opportunity to use the power that we have, even if it's a little bit limited or constrained, to undertake particular activities. So a lot of times in the US, if we hear this word leverage, which I'm going to talk about now, we're talking about borrowing some money or using a funding source to do things. But really, to me, when I think about leverage and I think about what it means, it's about power. It's about the power to accomplish your objectives as an archivist. Many of you may be familiar with the quote from the ancient Greek mathematician Archimedes, who said that leverage is said essentially this: if you give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, I shall move the world. And I was thinking about that talk and that quote today, because as archivists, if we use the power we have, we can document society in the way we want to. There's also a negative connotation to leverage. A lot of times people think about using the power they have over something or over somebody or doing things to other people. So here in the US, we have this popular television show called Yellowstone. And one of the characters on that says this: leverage is knowing that if someone had all the money in the world, this is what they'd buy, which is his property. But I really think of leverage as a more positive thing. One of my heroes here in the United States is the Dr. Martin Luther King. And he said, we can all get together more together than we can apart. And that is the way we gain power. So by coming together, we have the ability to achieve our purpose and the ability to affect change. And that's how I see our community placed, that by coming together and using the tools and services we have, we can affect change in society and in our organizations. I think regardless of where we work, our daily routines tend to be dominated by interacting with information and communication technologies. So on the slide here, I've placed the icons of a lot of organizations or services, and I would guess that many of you can recognize these technologies. You know what they are, you know what companies they represent. All of these technologies are fundamental to our daily existence, and they're the place in which society is documenting itself, the place in which records are being created. So in a way, we have to acknowledge that these technologies have a bit of power over our lives, but they also give us power to accomplish things. They connect us with each other, and they provide records that show what we're doing and that we as digital archivists seek to preserve. It's important to keep in mind, of course, that these are all public or private owners behind these companies. The groups of people here, these organizations, think, if at all, very infrequently about preserving records. But for us, that's at the core of our mission. So it's important to consider ways in which we can interact with the technologies on this slide to find and identify preservable digital objects. So I just would like to mention that, because a lot of these organizations are ephemeral. They could go away at any time. We can't necessarily depend on them. Here in the US, in the past several weeks, we've seen, for instance, that Facebook is laying off multiple people and seeking to become a leaner organization. It raises for me the question of whether Facebook would exist 20 or 30 years from now, and whether the records that are in Facebook that might document someone's society or be important to them would still be available within the service. Similarly, we see with Twitter right now, there is questions as to what Twitter will look like in the future, who will control the tweets that are sent out. And as archivists, we can use technologies to preserve records, but I don't think we can depend on Twitter or Elon Musk to preserve the records for us, right? So what I'd like to say is, when thinking about a lot of these commodity services, these technologies like Google Drive, like Box.com, like Twitter, like Facebook, like Instagram, like TikTok, like any of these technologies, if you understand what records are being created in those technologies, there are tools that you can use to plan to take them out of the technologies, make copies, and preserve them. A very interesting article I was reading a while back, which relates to this topic, is by Clifford Lynch, who is the director of the Coalition for Networked Information here in the United States. And he makes the point that if you look at the way a lot of these technologies work, they provide an experience, or they provide a flow of information over time. So while this article raises more questions, I would say, than answers, one of the most pressing that it raises is how we document society in a time when there are so many communication providers who provide a series of seemingly endless but difficult to capture and preserve experiences rather than fixed records. Cliff Lynch notes that this is a key challenge, and for me as an archivist, I do think that the right answer, at least in the short term, is to capture records out of these services, fix them into a format, and then preserve them in the technologies that we have. One way to do that, and one future trend that we're investigating here heavily, and I know that others are investigating, is using the application programming interfaces that these technologies provide. Once you understand and use these APIs, or these application programming interfaces, you can pull records from the services and preserve them in a repository infrastructure, or somewhere where you may wish to view them. A really interesting example of that emerged in the very early phases of the war between Ukraine and Russia, when a graduate of my institution here at the University of Illinois, but a person now working at Stanford University, started a project where 1,300 volunteers are capturing websites related to Ukraine and related to the Ukraine-Russia war. They're using the application programming interfaces. They're using technologies such as the Internet Archive to capture those records and preserve them, knowing that they could go away at any time otherwise. So I like to think about being an archivist using application programming interfaces, because they're where the action of the digital economy is. They're sort of the lingua franca of the internet. They're the way in which various communication devices speak to each other. They're kind of like the glue that holds the internet together. And they're just simply put a set of tools and commands that you can use to request information from a web services. So from an archivist perspective, APIs are very important because they provide data in the most pure form that we can get it from whoever has that data on the cloud. And most modern APIs also operate with a common language that can be understood and used relatively easily. The whole point of them is to shield developers from the complexity of a system and to make the data available so that we can exchange it and potentially preserve it. One technology that's using APIs very effectively is called the web recorder. So I'd like to refer you to that just very briefly. The web recorder is intended to preserve the interactive experiences of websites. So for example, if you're in Twitter, you click on a link or you scroll through a feed, it can preserve the look and feel of that feed and then move it into a cloud-based service where it can be preserved. Another example of an API-based archiving service is a new organization that recently started here in the United States called permanent.org. Permanent.org is something that's available to individuals who may wish to take records from their Twitter account, from Facebook, from Instagram, from their email, and gather it all in one location and preserve it. For a one-time fee or donation, you're given a certain amount of storage space and you can put records into the service. What I'm hoping to see is that permanent.org develops partnerships with libraries and archives, not just with individuals, because I think longer term, a service like that could be more supportable if it has an institutional partnerships. So those are some technologies to consider using. I'd like to also talk about ways in which you can implement institutions in your own context to gather records using an archival framework and then interact with those records, whether it be via social media, email archiving, or other emergent technologies. So just stepping back a bit, I'd like to mention what my understanding of an archives is. And in this public archives tradition I was talking about, an archives is essentially organized non-current records of an organization. So without going into detail, this emphasizes a few things, particularly that archives should be maintained with respect for their origination or their provenance and also their original order. I really like the definition of archives that David Bierman offers back in the 1980s. He refers to archives simply as transmitted information. And thinking in that sense that there are three components: there's a message being sent, there's a sending agent, there's a person or a machine sending the message, and there's a person or machine receiving the message. When you pull things back to this most fundamental level, it provides you an understanding that as long as you preserve that message that identify the sender and the recipient, you've preserved enough information to make the record into a preservable digital object. In essence, every message as it's transmitted preserves and provides some level of metadata with it as an integral part of the record. So the metadata itself, the record of its sending and receiving, is important to preserve, as well as all the actions taken about it over time. At the beginning, I asked you all about some examples of types of records or digital archives records, and you can see here I've included examples of those. They're all records, they're examples of human activity, whether that's authoring a document, whether it's playing a video, whether it's sending or receiving an email message. There are many other types of records, but by simply taking those records and fixing them into a location and putting them in a storage service or a repository, we've already taken a very big step toward their preservation. MyArchives has acquired many records and done this, in essence, put them in a folder or in a repository with the appropriate metadata. The most important thing behind any digital archives program is having this preservation ethos, focusing on how you acquire the materials, having an intent to preserve them, and then establishing some specific technologies to allow you to accomplish that work. At its most fundamental level, all digital archives work regardless of the complexity of the records that are being preserved, focuses on having a place to acquire and process the records and then some preservation repository behind them. So even when we're dealing with complex records, such as social media records, you can take these technologies and fix them into a storage format that can be preserved. About 5 or 6 years ago, I had a wonderful opportunity to work with a tool called the Social Feed Manager. This is a tool that's been developed by George Washington University in Washington, D.C. in the United States, and it helps you to build social media collections. In essence, you can connect the tool to Twitter, download social media or capture social media and tweets as they're happening, and then put them in a preservation format and put them in your preservation storage technology here. So these are the types of tools that are current trends now. A lot of organizations are beginning to use tools like the social media fact manager. But in essence, what they do is capture and fix these records into a form. So social media archiving is an important field. It's a prominent field, but I'd also like to tell you a little bit about trends in capturing and preserving email records, which is an area where my own research is most currently focused most heavily. If you think about it, most archives are filled with correspondence in print form. We have a lot of letters here. We have a lot of memoranda. We have a lot of documents that were sent from one individual to another. But to date, most archives have done relatively to preserve electronic correspondence. However, it is becoming much easier to do based on recent work. So I'd like to tell you about trends in that area. Email archiving is important because email is one of the most ubiquitous or common forms of communication currently, and it produces a lot of historical evidence potentially. Of course, there's a lot of very inconsequential things that are talked about in email as well, but email is the primary method of communicating information within most organizations and holds an incredible amount of information. So a lot of organizations here in the US are very actively implementing email preservation plans. From a personal perspective, email archiving sounds easy because you should be able to export messages and preserve them. But as I know from managing my own email, it's difficult because we run into quotas. We have small pots of emails sitting here that have been exported over time. And I've had my own set of challenges with preserving my own email messages going back to 2020. This slide here shows the results from some polls that my colleague did earlier this year regarding email archiving. In essence, we've asked questions about the level of email archiving that institutions are currently doing. And you can see from this poll that the majority of respondents have not either acquired email or have acquired it but not developed plans to process it. So we're hoping to change this so that more organizations are preserving one or more email collections and making it available. Some of the challenges with email archiving are around privacy and sensitivity of messages, how to select messages, how to preserve different formats, missing metadata, and so forth. And I won't go into detail about those challenges, but I'd just like to mention briefly that there are 2 publications available which can give you good background in email archiving. One is The Future of Email Archives, which was a report from a task force that I was a member of. And the second one is a report from the Digital Preservation Coalition on preserving email, which is also available. Thankfully, here in the United States, 2 organizations in particular are investing resources and grant funds in email archiving. The first is the Museum of Library and Information Services, which is a federal agency and has provided a grant to us at the University of Illinois. And the second is the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. The grant that the Andrew Mellon Foundation has invested in is email archiving, building community and capacity. This is a project that my colleague here at Illinois, Ruby Martinez, is coordinating, and we are funding 8 projects which are building email archiving tools or practices. I'd like to take an opportunity just to describe the 2 that I think are the most valuable and most immediately applicable for you. The first is a project called COSA Prepare. I can refer you to their website, but this is essentially a grant that seeks to preserve and prepare archives to be able to preserve email records. So it's working with state archives here in the United States and provides tools for conducting needs assessment, developing best practice documents, recommendations for selecting tools, providing technical assistance and mentoring. And there's a project website and a needs assessment report, which are available on the website of the Council of State Archivists here in the United States. The second project that I'd like to describe is called Mailbag, and this is led by the State University at New York, Albany. And this is developing a packaging format for preserving email archives once you have them in a format that's preservable, to put them in a particular stable package that can be widely used and then shared between institutions, providing some email processing tools. So again, here's the project website, and I'd just like to briefly refer you to that. My colleague, as I mentioned, Ruby, also conducted a regional survey. This was a short survey because, most people don't like completing long surveys, and it surveyed trends and needs with email archiving. You can see that from this question, one of the things she asked participants is, how well they're preserving email archives. And you can see that archives are beginning to acquire email, but most of them have not yet done so or not yet preserved the messages. So there are many needs out there. Those who had answered her questions had said that their main needs were for training and then for technology solutions. And those were the main obstacles that they were facing with email archiving. In the survey, many of them mentioned tools that they're using to preserve email. One that I'd like to draw particular attention to is this tool called ePad, or Email Process Appraise, Discover, and Deliver. So that's very valuable. But in the response, we also noticed that for those who are not preserving archives, many of them wanted a format based in PDF, which is a very commonly used format. So that gave us an idea to begin developing a specification to preserve email messages in PDF format, which leads me to my other project, the one that I'd like to tell you about now, which is developing a PDF-based standard for preserving email messages. This is a project that's funded by the Institute for Museum and Library Services. And while I'm directing the grant, I have a collaborator here, a graduate student, Eden Irwin, who is the community fellow and has supplied some slides for me to describe the project to you. So if you think about the email programs that you use, they have a print to PDF function built into them. And you can use that. You can see a PDF message, copy of the message. But if you look at it in detail, there are some problems with the message as it comes out currently from the print to PDF function. This is an example of an email message that was made just by pressing print to PDF in Gmail. And you can see that while it shows a copy of the message, not all of the metadata is here. And the attachment seems to be there, but if you click on it, it's not really there and it's not really accessible. It's not preserved as part of the PDF. So when you currently print an email message to PDF, you retain the visible parts of the message, but links may or may not remain active. Attachments may not be included, and a lot of metadata might be lost. So for this reason, we think it's good to develop a standard called PDF Mail, which would be similar to PDF-A, which is complementary and has preservation features built into the PDF standard. This would include additional metadata about the messages. And we like this idea because PDF is already very heavily used within the archives community to preserve other types of documentation. So we think that by having a PDF-based standard for email, many more archives would be able to print messages to email, have a good record, and all of the authenticity of the message included, and then make that message available. So again, as I mentioned, with the current email to PDF functionality, you don't necessarily know that everything is included. The attachments might not be there. The links may or may not remain active. And there's only a little bit of metadata, not the entirety of the metadata from the message. So what we're really looking to do is take the fluidity of the email message remove the email from its server and make a PDF copy of it, that's both preservable and can be used for evidential value and for informational value. In the second phase of this email to PDF project, which we're currently engaged, the University of Illinois here has a partnership with the PDF Association, which is the main organization that helps set standards for the PDF Association. And as part of this phase 2 project, we have this industry collaboration to develop a detailed technical specification for this EA PDF format. We're also building a tool, an open source proof of concept tool that can convert messages from email to the new EA PDF, email archiving in PDF file format that we're developing. As another stage of the project, we are also building and hoping to see built a tool that will offer a browsing experience similar to the email client software that we typically use, but using the EA PDF, the email archiving and PDF file as a source to represent these EA PDF compliant messages. That would look a little bit like something you see on the screen here, and that's the ultimate goal, is to have a tool that makes it easy to browse and access these preserved email messages in PDF format. One thing I'd like to leave you with here is that there are a lot of organizations that are collaborating on this project and are interested in the results of it. As you can see, many of them are central here in the United States, although we do have a collaboration with the Digital Preservation Coalition. But because this standard is PDF based, it would be available throughout the world, and it would also work very well with non-English scripts such as Arabic. So this is a little bit more detail than is probably necessary about the technology, but you can see the ultimate goal we have here is for a PDF-M file format, which would be similar to PDF-A, but based specifically for email messages. As part of that file format, we would have included in it all of the header metadata from the email message as XMP, which is the standard format that PDF uses for that. It would also include some embedded files, such as the raw version of the message, all the attachments that are included, any HTML content that might be either internal to the message or referenced externally. And it would also provide a navigational aid or a way to browse through the messages. So this is a very interesting project. If you would like to participate in it, the PDF Association has a liaison working group that you can join simply by sending a message to info@pdassociation.org. And I'd be very happy to have any of you involved in that project if possible. As I mentioned, one of the other future trends that we're investigating and working with heavily is using these application programming interfaces to preserve records. Email is one record type, but it's one of only many record types. So I'd like to just look at some of these application programming interfaces that are available. Facebook has application programming interface. Twitter has one. Box, which is a file storage service, has one. Google Drive has one. Microsoft has one. And all of them operate like all APIs do by building connections between different resources, between things such as a photo, a document, an individual who may be using it, and the resource connections that you wish to preserve. So by using these APIs, you can connect to these resources and then harvest them and preserve them. Another opportunity here for us, I think, as a community is to build additional partnerships. Because digital preservation is so complex an issue and there are so many organizations involved, I look to organizations such as the Digital Preservation Coalition, Naseej, the Open Preservation Foundation, the Data Curation Network, and other organizations as essential in building the standards and tools that we'll use to preserve the next set of records. Finally, I'd just like to note that these partnerships are best built in collaboration with others, and describe the partnership we are currently engaged with here at Illinois, because it's providing a repository service for us into which we can place records. Here at the university, we have an open architecture for our digital repository service. Unlike many of the other libraries and archives in the United States, we have our locally developed technology for digital archives and preservation, including digital collections, research publications, research data, and digitized newspapers. So I'd like to take a few moments just to describe the architecture of this, as well as our long-term service plans for it, because not because the technology is important in and of itself, but because it provides an example of how technology partnerships can be built using commodity services. So our repository here is built in a set of layers, and starting at the bottom or the base here, you can see we have implemented it in Amazon Web Services. On top of Amazon Web Services, we have a collection registry and a digital preservation repository, which you can think of as a dark archives. This uses all the core Amazon Web Services technologies to implement a preservation services, to run checksum analysis, to run file integrity operations, and also to provide some basic descriptive information. And then on top of that, we also have available, in essence, currently 3 services: a digital repository and an institutional repository, a data bank, and then a digital library containing materials that would be like photographs, email, correspondence, and so forth. Above that, there's a search gateway for all of the collections, and then connections between our online public access resource and other discovery services. We're also currently in the process of building an archival descriptive system and an authority control system to weave all of these technologies together. Now, as I mentioned, we developed this all on our own, and as a technology manager, I'm very supportive of the technology, but realize that to preserve it, we also need to have other partners. So starting this year, we rebuilt the institutional repository using our own technology instead of DSpace, and are then using that as the basis for a shared repository for Illinois scholarship. We're partnering with our local consortium here, and we'll be offering this same service to these organizations. One of the things we discovered is when we did an analysis of the infrastructure cost, that we can have about 14 institutions included for only about double the cost of running this technology on our own. So over the next 3 to 5 years, we'll be seeking to add as many organizations as possible to this infrastructure, because it helps supplement and build partnerships by sharing the technology from our organization with our regional partners. You can see that as more organizations join over time, the per institutional cost falls considerably. So this is an open architecture. It's a good architecture for us, but thinking about current and future trends in archives, it also leads me to some reflections, which are that running your own technology is very challenging. As a large research institution, we can do it because, we have 50,000 students. We have large external grants from the National Science Foundation and other areas. But even in our case, we're very dependent upon our own staff skills. It gives us a lot of flexibility, but we seek to develop additional partnerships. As with a commercial service, we have to plan for outside sustainability. So it may indicate that in your own institution, it would be better to work with a commercial or nonprofit consortium that's local to your own region, because that provides us the best opportunity to collaborate and build. So I'd like to just close then and leave some time for some final questions and comments from all of you. But we're hoping to see this technology in place because it provides us an opportunity to do three things in particular that I see as the most important future trends for digital archives. The first of those is making collections available as a form of data. What that means is that every collection we have in digital form, we intend to provide as a downloadable packet and as a large bulk of material so that people can bring their own tools and services to interrogate it, to question it, to data mine it, to analyze it on their own. That means that as opposed to just providing a single photograph, we would provide an interface that allows people to download dozens, hundreds, or thousands of photographs along with all of the associated metadata, and then analyze it using their own tools or services. The second trend we see and that we're engaged with is the application of machine learning and artificial intelligence to these larger collections. We're actively seeking to use tools like entity recognition, predictive analysis using algorithms to group collections together and other technologies. There's a project from the United Kingdom called the Aeolian Network, which is engaged in this area. And the US National Archives here also recently issued a report about how they're using machine learning and artificial intelligence to classify and arrange and describe their records. And then the final trend I see is I'd like to encourage organizations to think about ways that personal digital archiving, in other words, people capturing their own email, their own Twitter, their own Facebook, their own Instagram, can be placed in institutional archives. As I mentioned, there are tools like permanent.org, and I think by building deeper connections with those types of services with institutional archival programs, we can provide a more complete and full record of society and fulfilling our mission again in our own context. So thank you so much for letting me speak with you today. I am very appreciative of this opportunity. I hope my reflections are of some value to all of you, and I just look forward to the questions and discussion.
I would like to thank you, Professor Christopher, so much for this interesting presentation, which I thought that it's very successful because it raised many questions more than answering. So that's why maybe when I switch out and looking back, I found that there is many questions comes from here. But I would like to thank you so much about this, and this is one of the key success for any presentation we used to deliver through Naseej Academy window. For sure, I would like to start with our owner partner, Professor Nabhan, to give us his reflection about on the presentation and share with us and with Professor Christopher as well his thoughts and concern regarding the digital archive. So please, Dr. Nabhan, you can start at the beginning before we start the questions.
Thank you, Prof. Abdullah, and many thanks actually for Prof. Christopher for this presentation. It's really very interesting and very informative. Actually, we actually learn a lot of things today, and there are new things. And I would like to thank you actually for focusing in email management and preservation. This is really new for me, and it's still out of our consideration actually in our institutions. And also I would like to ask you two questions, please, if you allowed me. And so the first, based on your experience of your university or USA in general, how do you deal with the voice record or video records? How do you deal with them? And you know, these records are totally different in format, and how do you preserve them? This is the first question. And the second, what technique do you use to to deal with the social media. Actually, if we consider them as a record that can be used for research or planning or making decision, how do you deal with social media? What technology do you use for analyzing social media? So would like to know based on your experience, please. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. Those are both very good questions. And yeah, I'll be pleased to start by talking about the voice and the video technologies. So we here in our organization are very fortunate to have a audiovisual preservation lab service, which one of our big challenges is taking media that might be an audio tape or a videotape or a film and then converting it. We have so many demands for this service actually that we keep our own lab busy in the library here, and then also have found that it's very, very effective to send those to external services to contract for them to convert them for us. So as an example of this, I have a project I'm working with a colleague on right now where we have oral history interviews that were done of individuals, American Indian individuals on Native American tribal communities here in the United States in the 1970s. And we have a partner who converts those to us and then provides them to us with technical metadata so that we can take the digital file and we preserve it within our repository. We have not totally solved the issue of how to provide access to these recordings. What we seek to do is use a university service which is used for course instruction, and we typically upload them into that service and then use that as a streaming technology. We have uploaded some of them to YouTube and other services as well, but we don't count on that for the preservation piece. We always keep a copy using, I believe, the MPEG format, and there's a particular codec that they use to ensure that everything is using the same basic preservation format. So we do that for both audio and video. We preserve a copy of it in our own repository here. And then second, with the social media, this is still a challenging area. The tool that I've used most extensively is this one called the Social Feed Manager. And there is a project website at George Washington University that talks about this. This is a nice tool because it's optimized to run either on a single computer or on a server, and you can download it and install it, and it would then harvest material from Twitter according to what parameters you set. Some of the services can be very challenging. So for example, Facebook and Instagram, in order to really archive anything from it, you really need to have the individual's password and credentials to get the full access. So it's a very challenging area, but I would recommend the Social Feed Manager. And I can also send some links to some other tools and services as well.
Thank you, Prof. It is clear. And I'm done, Prof. Abdullah. Thank you so much.
Thanks for you. You gave us the appetizer of the question, so it was a really interesting one, and it's motivating me just to start with two questions. One of them I will leave it to the end of the questions, and the first one, because you raised it, Dr. Nurhan, it's about the copyright issue regarding the emails and the social media. So how you dealt with this, Chris, especially in the academic community? So do you have some sort of agreement or some paper should be done? Please give us more elaboration about this.
Yeah, thank you. That's the $1 million question. It's a very complex one. I can answer it in a couple of ways.
Take your time. Yeah.
Well, the first approach that people are taking is, if we're talking about an archives of an individual and not the archives of an organization, what we typically would do is, when we develop a gift agreement with them, we would get specific permission to preserve their email messages. And then there's not a problem with their own messages and the ones they sent and received. There is a concern, of course, with the third-party messages or other messages that are included in there. So typically the approach that's been taken is we would preserve it in our repository, but we would not post it online or make it publicly accessible. There's a project called ePad, which is I will put the link in here. There's a project called ePad, which has a tool where you can preserve email messages and then also search them and get information about them, but without actually looking at the full message. So this is a good tool because then you can keep the messages offline and people can know about them, but request a copy offline. So that's one way to approach it. The second way is with our institutional archives. One of my colleagues here has worked out an arrangement with our technology services where by everybody's official emails that they undertake as part of their, for example, as the dean of a university, a copy of all of those is kept. And then our plan is to treat it like other administrative records where it would not be accessible for 20 years or so, unless somebody submitted a specific legal request for it. And then we would potentially make it available in 20 years. So I'm not sure that's the best solution to the problem, but it's what we're currently doing.
Thank you for this telegraphic answer, because I think we have many questions. I try to order it as it comes, but there is a big one come from David Hirsch. He asking, thanks for that, and then he asking about the storage. It's one of the thing, but are there new standards? Or now there is a standard for indexing Twitter feeds. Would be grateful for any guidance if there is. So thank you, David from MBRL. So would you give more elaboration about this, Chris, please?
So the question is for indexing.
It's about, it's about the storage issue. It's a big issue for him, and also indexing Twitter feeds.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
If there is guidance in this one. Thank you.
Yeah. Again, so good, two good deep questions. The storage issue. There are a variety of trends that I think David and others can look to. There are storage options that are available either from commercial providers or from some nonprofit organizations as well that make recommendations about this. So, for example, there are organizations such as Dryad is an organization which is a nonprofit that provides data storage. But in most organizations, it would be best to build a partnership with your information technology, have them assess potential storage solutions and options, and then contract with one of those organizations. There are quite a few of these within the archives community that have sprung up in the past 10 to 12 years or so. And that's certainly a possibility to look at. With the indexing of Twitter, that's, I would say, an area where standards are still being developed, but it's important to keep in mind that with Twitter, you typically receive from them all of the metadata about the message that they present. And that's the part that you would index. What they do is they provide you, when you request the information from them, a response using JSON, which is the structured language for ordering metadata, that's commonly used on the internet. And then it has a standard set of fields there, including the name or the account that tweeted the message, the content of the tweet, the time it was tweeted. So all of that would be mapped into a metadata schema that the local repository service uses. So I hope that answers the question. They're both quite complex and could probably be presentations on their own. So
yeah, we're just saying that we will, after your permission, for sure, we will upload it to our YouTube channel for Naseej Academy and also for the presentation. Thank you. The next question is from Iman, and she asking about how it's possible of saving and archiving email message in the institution. This is, I think, related to what I just mentioned, but it's talking about those with the signature. So sometimes there is a electronic signature. So she asking about that. This is also could be a private issue.
Right. Yeah, thank you. That's again an excellent question. When the first parts of the working group that I was engaged with talked about these digital signatures with email messages extensively, and is the standards that we're developing to preserve the messages through that project I mentioned, such as the Mailbag Project or the COSA project. The understanding there is that as long as you preserve the entirety of that header information that's there, all the digital signature information would be included. The problem you may run into is that if it references an external certificate, over time that certificate may become invalid. But that's really something that's beyond our control.
Yeah.
In the PDF-based standard that I was talking about, we are planning to include those digital signatures as part of the preserved metadata in that standard as well. So really all we can do is preserve the header information as it's there, but the external certificate that it might be authenticated against, if that disappears at some future point, you would just have to trust that the original metadata had been preserved, and that's really about all you could do. So
yeah. Thank you. There is a question related to the government processes or policies regarding to the digital archive in the institutions like the universities and so there is some umbrella or some guidance should be followed by the institution.
Yes, right, exactly. I think that's in a way the most critical element. I didn't include it in the presentation here, but there's a workshop that I teach about email archiving, and one of the most critical parts of that is the policy discussion. Just very briefly, what a lot of institutions in the U.S. here are using is developing a policy based on recommendations from the U.S. National Archives, which is called the Capstone. Just one second here, and I'll put this into the chat. It's called the Capstone approach. And what they say is that as an institutional policy, any email that goes through certain email accounts, that may be the director of an agency, it may be the head of an organization, it may be the head of a program, the entirety of that account is worthy of preservation. So they don't try to say which particular individual messages should be preserved, but simply that by the virtue of somebody being in a particular office, all of their messages should be captured and preserved. So that's a policy that's been found to be very effective. We are using that here at the University of Illinois as well, and I know many other organizations are interested. But if you just look through this through Google, Capstone email archives or email, you will find information about it.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. There is, I call it or describe it as an old and renewable question. It's about this transformation into a digital archive will affect negatively on the role of the human archivist, or at least minimize their role.
Actually, yeah, that's a good question. I actually, I think that there'll be at least as much need for humans and archivists in the future as there is in the present. And the reason for that is most of our work actually involves the more fundamental question that a computer can never address, which is, why is something worth preserving in the first place? and then building a relationship with the individual who has those records and a partnership to help identify and preserve the right sort of thing. So even if you take artificial intelligence, for example, I could see artificial intelligence helping us to, whittle down the amount of information so that we can make a decision about it, but you still need a human and you need an archivist to look through the amount, the data that the AI algorithm might present, and then write a descriptive record about it. We've tried experiments where we had artificial intelligence try to develop metadata for particular items. And it was interesting, but at the end of the day, it was an input into a process where we still wrote the descriptive record after it was done. We didn't just use the results of the process and say that it was good enough. So I think there will continue to be a role. And in fact, there'll probably be an even more prominent role for information professionals. That's certainly my sense. We have, when I look at the positions we're hiring for here for faculty at the University of Illinois, we want people that are skilled with digital technologies, but we don't think that they're being replaced by them in any way.
Perfect. Yeah, and I feel that if I can elaborate more here, the more that we get closer to the content, the more that we will need the human factor. Also, I think that the issue of the skills of the people just working in the library field, normally they have to move on the stereotype of the classical role. So they need to encourage themselves to have more skills and get closer to the technology. You right? Are you agree with me, Chris, about it?
Yes, I completely agree. Agree.
Okay, thank you, because your comment on the AI make us drop another two questions. It comes from Salman there, because they ask about what you just answered now. But there is a question comes from a professor here in many universities in Egypt. He asking about the blockchain and application in relation with the archive and digital archive. So there is another technology they need more elaboration about it, please.
Yeah, thank you. I will start by saying I'm far from an expert in blockchain technology. I do understand at base how it works, that you keep a record of all the prior transactions and an auditable record of all those transactions. I'm not really sure as from the archival perspective that it gains us a lot, because we have a set of human systems that can also be used to guarantee that authenticity. I emerge from a very skeptical place with it. I also think that there is a report that those who are interested could read about that would provide a very good background if they want to explore it further. And this is a report from Victoria Lemieux at the University of British Columbia, who's extensively written about this area. Let me just put her. Right. So Victoria Lemieux at the University of British Columbia has written a very good report about uses of blockchain technology potentially with archives. I have thought it's been interesting for me as an archivist to see the emergence of these NFTs and the large, market around things that are, from my perspective, very ephemeral in nature and don't seem to have much underlying value to them. I think it poses challenges for us, because if digital objects become something that has a high monetary value, how can we as archivists engage in information professionals? I just think it's a very, very challenging area, and one that I need to give quite a bit of additional thought to.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And again, we are so appreciated to the very telegraphic answer, because we have many questions. I try to stick to the time frame. So thank you for your time. This question it's about the verbal or the archives, and if it is easy, or at least there is some issues related to it for the non. I try to put it in the Arabic because he made it in Arabic. Okay, he asked about the verbal heritage or verbal archives, and how it goes smoothly if you're talking about other language, not English or not Arabic for us. So there is the digital archives walk through this in a good way.
So, okay, let me make sure I understand. The question is about preserving
The verbal, yes.
verbal heritage, so linguistic heritage.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's much more work that needs to be done in that area. I'm currently aware of a couple of projects here in the United States where there are people coming from other countries, either as immigrants or refugees, that are bringing languages that may be under threat of disappearing. Or we have languages here in the US as well from our Native American tribes that might be disappearing as well because there are so few speakers of them left. And I know, for instance, the National Endowment for the Humanities and organizations such as private foundations here are developing grants so that speakers of those languages can be interviewed and their language preserved orally on tape and then put into preservation repositories. But it's a very much an emerging field, I would say. In order for it to really work well, I think you'd need a partnership with the library and information science community, others in the academics community, probably including cultural anthropologists and others who are really skilled in working with people of communities that where there may be a very small number of speakers of that languge.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think, yeah, because I think that the formulation this one. Okay, there is, I think, some questions related to the security issue and other related to the financial issue. So you can give just a very comprehensive insight from your prospect, Chris, regarding the security issue for the digital archive. And then the other part, you can just talk about the financial issue, and is it doable for the academic institution? You know, that they suffering from the financial issue.
Sure.
Issue. Yes, please.
Sure. Yeah, very, very good. So from the security perspective, I feel as if, and I'm quite confident that most of the digital repository services that we have available to us do meet our security needs. We've had an audit done, and in fact, there are organizations for a very small fee that would conduct a security audit over repository software. And usually almost the software is always configured in such a way that the digital assets are available only to those who have permission to access them. So I think the security issues are good ones to talk about with your own IT staff at your institutions. But even if you're contracting with an external service, the security is often issues are best addressed regarding how you define your own access permissions to the systems. Regarding the financial question, I would say digital preservation can be both as inexpensive or as expensive as you want it to be. So again, without mentioning specific companies here, I know there are organizations that offer digital preservation services and even free digital preservation services as a starter pack. I wouldn't recommend that most organizations set up their own digital archives like we did. If you look to some of the services that are available and you have a good relationship with your own information technology staff in your organization, for a very modest fee, you can have access to some of these services. They're actually quite affordable, and they're targeted. They come out of the digital preservation community as well. So you're dealing with a company that has an established track record and is part of the community. I would say another option that might be freely available to people is to work with an organization called the Internet Archive here in the United States, which is always building partnerships and is quite, oftentimes there's no cost to those partnerships. So.
Very good. I'd like to thank you so much because we're almost 7 minutes over the time, but I keep my last question for the end because I think this is for you as an academic. It's about your vision or futuristic vision for teaching digital archive within the School of Library Information Science or iSchool like yours. And I think Dr. Nabhan is joining me about this question.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, very good question. If you're asking about me teaching personally, at the present time, I'm not teaching in the School of Information Sciences here, although I do guest lecture from time to time. I will mention the school here is currently hiring 2 people to teach digital archives and digital preservation.
Perfect.
So it's an area that we're actively investing in. And I'm looking forward to partnering with whoever they hire. And you know, we hire people from around the world here. So if there's somebody in the Arabic speaking world who's interested in coming to Illinois, I'd be very interested to send the job description to them.
Yeah. But my question actually is about you know that how the program, that the core program, how do you think the best way to deliver it to the student, whether just in the undergraduate or postgraduate? So do you think that there should be a specific approach to teach digital archive in the library schools?
Yeah, that's okay. Good. Yeah, thank you. Yes, I do think I think the best approach is a combination of what we're doing now. So some online instruction, but then complementary to that, if the student can have a connection with a local archives program via an internship or a practicum where they're working hands-on with a specific problem. To take an example of that, we could see where we had a student in the program here getting 2 semesters worth of study, and then in their 3rd year of the 4th semester of their graduate program, having an internship in a local archives where they process a digital collection. So they get some hands-on experience with a mentor. I think that really is the best approach. We have here assistantships and students that we work with extensively. So I think a combination of those 2 things would be best, if that answers your question.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. I do appreciate. I know that there is many questions, so I do apologize for that, and we are welcoming to send this one. As you see that there are hundreds of digital hearts and thumb up for you, so that's reflecting. This is reflecting really how the attendees enjoyed this and they're having interesting. Thank you, Christopher, and I think this is not the last time that we will have you here, and for sure we are so glad to have Professor Nabhan, and I will leave the wrapping up and closing this wonderful webinar to him to wrapping up this one. Dr. Nabhan, please, you can wrap
Thank you,
up
Prof.
this.
Abdullah. By end of this great lecture, I'm representing members of Arab Federation for Libraries and Information. I would like to thank Prof. Christopher. And again, I would be pleased actually to collaborate in the future. And also I would like to thank you, Prof. Abdullah, for this opportunity actually to collaborate with Naseej Academy, and hope so to see you again, inshallah, soon. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Nabhan. And the last word will be for you, our owner guest, Professor Christopher. Please, Chris, give us the last word.
Well, again, I'm just very, very appreciative for all of you for being here, for the invitation to collaborate in the future as well. I sincerely appreciate that, and I look forward to future contact, future friendships, and again, just thank you all for having me and giving me this nice break in my day between all the other things I'm doing. This is what I really love and enjoy. So thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you for our team. شكرا لكم جميعا، ونلقاكم على خير بإذن الله في ندوة علمية أخرى من ندوات نسيج، ولنا موعد آخر مع المنح وكيفية التقدم لها والفرص الموجودة في الندوة القادمة بإذن الله. Thank you for everybody. شكرا جميعا ونلقاكم على خير بإذن الله. باي. السلام عليكم دكتور.
I know.
Okay.